And welcome back to Love Your Food. This week we have this amazing recipe for you, which is a spinach pastry, and the pastry is made from red lentils and cheese, and we'll show you how that works in just a second. First, I'd like to remind everyone that we have an affiliate link with Chef's Temp. If you need a kitchen thermometer or meat probe, please check out the link in the description below, and use code LOVEYOURFOOD on checkout for 15% off your order. Now, in the meantime, here's our ingredients for this. So we're starting with some frozen spinach, some eggs, some salt, some baking powder, some dill seeds, some white and black sesame seeds, red lentils, an onion, some olive oil, some cottage cheese, and some feta cheese. Now we got pressed cottage cheese, and you can use the regular, just the one with all the whey included, that's just fine. Now the first thing we're going to do is we're going to soak the lentils overnight. So we're going to get those into a jar, and we're going to get those covered with some cold water, actually a lot of cold water. And we just want to make sure that these have soaked overnight. They're going to swell up, and it's also going to make it easier for us to rinse them the following day. Now, one thing that you do want to make sure you do with your lentils is give them a very solid rinse. They tend to get kind of dusty, and they're also covered with, like quinoa, they're covered with saponins, which are chemicals that make the water kind of foamy and sudsy, and they're also quite bitter. So you don't want those in there, so you want to give them a really solid rinse before you cook with them. So we're going to put these, we've got these in a tammy here, we're just going to let these dry. You want them to be really well drained before you use them in this recipe. But here they are, they've soaked overnight, and now we're just going to drain them and try and get as much water as we can out of them while we start doing everything else and getting everything else ready for this recipe. So the first thing we're going to do is chop up our onions, and we're just going to do a reasonably fine dice on these. They don't have to be super tiny. You also don't want huge chunks of onion in there, so we're just going to pop those into a bowl. We're also going to break up the feta cheese. Now, this recipe called for not a whole lot of feta. It could have used more. We sort of made this out of a couple of different recipes we'd found. Going forward, we would definitely add a little more feta in this recipe. You also want to drain your frozen spinach. Now, this recipe is much easier if you use frozen spinach, but you do want to make sure you get a lot of that liquid out of it. You can see there, we're just going to drain as much of that liquid out as we can, and just give it a good squeeze to get that water out of it. So we've got a little bit of black pepper and our dill seeds, and we're going to just grind those up, and we're going to add this into the mixture with the onions and the spinach in there and the feta. This is the filling for our little pastries. A little bit of olive oil in there. And then we're going to start mixing that up. So we're just going to mix that up until everything is well combined. And that's our filling. So that's going to just sit there for a little while and let all the flavors come together. Meanwhile, we're going to get the batter ready for the pastry. Now, it's a little odd. This recipe, it doesn't have any flour, and this pastry is basically just lentils, cheese, and egg. So we're going to break up the cottage cheese. Like I said, we used pressed cottage cheese. You can use just regular cottage cheese that comes in a tub that has all the whey included. We did end up having to add a little bit of liquid to this because it wasn't quite loose enough to pour. If you use the cottage cheese that comes in a tub, you may not need to add as much liquid as we did. So we're going to add our eggs in there, add in our salt, a little bit of fresh cracked black pepper as well. And this is also going to get a little bit of this olive oil. And then we're going to make this needs to become a batter. And like I said, it's going to be quite loose when everything's said and done. So we're going to get our stick blender in there. This would probably go easier in a regular stand blender, which we don't have. We used our stick blender, which worked fine. And you can see we're adding just a little bit of water in there just to make sure that it's it's loose enough that we're going to be able to pour it. And then once we've got it to where we want it, we are going to add in our baking powder. So we're just going to mix that in and make sure it's well distributed everywhere in there. And you can also adjust the flavor at this point. If you need to add liquid, we added some water. We also added a little bit of lemon juice, which is fine. So this is going to get poured. You can see it's really easy to pour. We're going to pour that into a greased and parchment-lined baking pan. So this is a 9x13. If you have a 9x9, you could use that as well. It'll just be a thicker pastry all around. So you're going to use about 2/3 of it to make the bottom layer. Then we're going to get our filling in there. So we want to sort of delicately place it. We don't want to press it down. We don't want it to break the bottom layer of our pastry. And we just want it to sit nicely on top like that, and try to get it as even as you can and all the way out to the edges as much as you can. And then we're going to use the last third on top and just cover the whole thing as close as we can to all the edges and get everything covered. And if you need to, just use a scraper, spread it out a little bit. It is a fairly sticky batter, so it is going to stick to your scraper. And it doesn't need to be perfectly covered. It doesn't need, every little bit of spinach doesn't need to be covered. This will puff up a little bit as well. On top of that, we're going to add our mixture of white and black sesame seeds. More traditional in something like this would actually be nigella seeds, which we had a hard time finding, but we did have black sesame seeds, which has a very similar look. And that's going to go into our oven until, you can see here, it has come out. It's nice and puffy. It's got some brown bits. The pastry is nice and crispy. The bottom is well done. And you want to make sure that it is cooked all the way through. So once it's cool enough that it is fairly solid, so just a couple minutes, we're going to pull that out using the parchment and let it cool completely on a rack. And then we're going to cut it into slices. And we took this 9x13 pan, we used it to make 8 different slices, so cut it in half lengthwise, and then in half and a half again. And there you go, you see the nice pastry on the bottom, cooked all the way through, that nice filling in the middle. Beautiful and crispy on the bottom, nice little brown bits on top, and absolutely delicious. We served that with, as you can see here, a nice little tomato salad, tomato and cucumber salad on top, and garnished with a little nasturtium flour, and that's it. That's the whole thing. Absolutely delicious. This was a bit of an experiment for us, and it worked very, very well, and we hope you'll give this one a try. If you like this recipe, please do like and subscribe, and if you have any recipes you'd like to see Chef Caleb try on the channel, please let us know in the comments below. We'd like to thank our patrons over on Patreon. I'll put a link for that in the description below as well, and remember to love your food.